Today we're going to be working with 1.2 adding integers. Our essential question for today is the sum of two integers positive, negative, or zero? So today we're going to be looking at, given certain conditions, can we expect the outcome of our addition to either be a positive number, a negative number, or can we expect it to be zero? Okay, so now our goal is to get some practice adding those integers together in those different cases. Then finally, we're going to be working on showing why the sum of an integer and its opposite is zero. And then we're also going to be working on some real-life problems and explaining why this is useful in the real world. So the first case that we have is when we are adding integers with the same sign. When we're adding integers with the same sign, we're adding the absolute values of the integers, then using the common sign at the end. Essentially, what we want to say in normal person's language is we're going to look at it like normal addition. We're going to treat it like normal addition. We're going to ignore the signs at first, and then we are going to take that sign at the very end. So what we're seeing here is we have this 2 plus 5. Now, without even looking at it, we can see that this is a positive 2 and this is a positive 5. So a positive 2 plus a positive 5 is going to be a positive 7. And over here we can see a negative 2 plus a negative 5. Well, in order to work with our negative numbers, we don't actually have to pay attention to these right now. Okay, we can just treat it like normal addition because they're both negative and say, well, 2 plus 5 is equal to 7. The only thing we have to remember is, oh yeah, remember they were actually negative numbers, and so we can say, oh, that's ending up being a negative 7. So we can look at this in a couple of different ways. The first way that we can look at this is in positive and negative counters. So over here we have a positive 2. So we can think of that as plus and plus. Okay, and then we have a positive 5 also. So we're going to add to that 5 other positives. So we can say that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other positives. So as we look at this, what we can say is total in this whole equation right here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positives, which gives us this positive 7. So all of these positives together add up to positive 7. Well, it's the same thing over here, except instead of positives over here, what we actually have are negatives. So we can say this is negative and negative plus our 5 negatives over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's going to end up giving us those 7 different negatives. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 negative numbers. So over here we have this negative 2 plus negative 5. We treat it like normal addition, 2 plus 5, that's going to give us 7 negatives. So that's going to be a negative 7. So let's go ahead and look at our first example here. We want to add integers with the same sign. We're going to be finding negative 2 plus negative 4, and we're going to be using a number line to check our answer. So as we look at this, we can first say, okay, wait, Mr. King said we don't have to pay attention to the sign at first. So we can just ignore this negative and ignore this negative. We say, oh yeah, 2 plus 4 is equal to 6. But remember, those were negative numbers, so we can say that that has to be a negative 6 because we had 2 negatives here, 4 negatives here, and we can say, oh yeah, that makes it negative 6. So we're going to go ahead and make our number line, okay? And we can say, okay, let's check this out. So when we're checking this out, what we want to make sure is that we are looking for that negative 2. So we're going to show that negative 2 distance and that negative 4 distance. When we add both of those distances together, what we see is we have a total of a negative 6, which gives us what we want. Okay, so we started by moving 2 in the negative direction, and then we moved another 4 in that negative direction, which got us all the way to our answer of negative 6. So here's another example doing the same thing. We're adding integers with the same sign. And again, we can see that, hey, this has a negative number right here and a negative number right here. So since they have the same sign, we can treat it like normal addition. So 3 plus 12 is what? Well, 3 plus 12 is equal to 15. But again, remembering that these were negative numbers, we know that it has to add up to negative 15. Now we can come down and check this on our number line. So let's start right here. Let's say this is negative 3. Okay, so we start here at 0. Okay, and we went over to negative 3. Okay, that was our negative 3. Well, now we have to go over another negative 12. We have to add 12 more negatives. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And as we see, when we have this right here and we add this negative 12, it's going to take us all the way out to negative 15. Just to make sure we can say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So we get all the way out to our negative 15 number here. So go ahead and pause the video now so that you can try this on your own first, and then once you're done trying this out, go ahead and push play so you can see how your work compares with mine. Okay, so on number 1 here, what we're seeing is we have 7 plus 13. So as we add 7 to 13, we can see that both of these have the same sign, so we're going to treat it like regular addition, and 7 plus 13 is going to be equal to 20. Okay, again, we're going to look at this and we see number 2. We have negative 8 plus negative 5. They both have the same sign, so we're going to treat it like regular addition. Say 8 plus 5 is going to be equal to 13. Yes, 13. And so we can say, okay, that's 13. But wait, they were negative, so we need to make sure that that's a negative 13. Okay, now as we look at this, we can also see that this is going to be negative 20 plus a negative 15. As we look at this, we can say, okay, so that negative 20 plus that negative 15, they have the same sign. They're both negative. So as we see that they're both negative, we can then go ahead and just treat this like regular addition, and 20 plus 15 is going to give us 35. But again, remember, since they were both negative, our answer should also be negative. So we have, for answer number 1 is 20, for answer number 2 is 13, and for answer number 3 is negative 35. Okay, so up until this point, we've been adding integers with the same sign. They were either both positive or they were both negative. But in this case, we're going to start moving into adding integers with different signs. So in that case that you have a positive number plus a negative number, or a negative number plus a positive number, how do we deal with that? And so as we can see, we can actually just subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value. Then use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. Well, what does that mean, Mr. King? Well, as we look at this, we can actually treat it like normal subtraction, making sure that we are subtracting the smaller number from the bigger number, and then we're also going to make sure that we keep the sign of the bigger number. So when we look at this, we can say, okay, we have 8 plus negative 10. So these signs don't match up. This is a negative number, and this is a positive number. So as we look at those two things, we can say, okay, we're going to actually turn that into some subtraction. We're going to take the smaller number away from the bigger number. So we're going to say 10 minus 8. Well, 10 minus 8 is equal to 2. Now we need to remember, what was the sign of our original number? Well, it was a negative. So we're going to stick a negative out front. So we have 8 plus negative 10 is going to be equal to negative 2. And the way we did that is we took subtraction from bigger to smaller number, and then we added that sign of the bigger number back into our answer. So again, looking at negative 13 plus 17, okay, we know 17 is bigger. So we'll take 17, and we're going to subtract 13, which is our smaller number. So subtract 13. And 17 minus 13 is going to be equal to 4. Now we need to find the sign of our bigger number. So the sign of our bigger number, 17, was positive. So that means our 4 is also going to be positive. So it's going to be a positive 4. Okay, so we're going to work through some more examples if you didn't quite get that, so don't worry yet. But we're generally going to be working with subtraction when we're adding integers of different signs. Okay, so again, working through this example, we're going to be adding integers with different signs. So we want to find the sum of 5 plus negative 10. So we can see this 5 is a positive number. We can see this 10 is a negative number. And so what we can say is, okay, I want to take the larger absolute value. So which one of these two numbers is bigger? Okay, so is 10 bigger than 5? Well, yeah, so we're going to take 10. We're going to take away the smaller number, so 10 minus 5. And then we're going to say, okay, 10 minus 5 is equal to 5. And then we need to make sure that this sign of this number matches up with the original bigger number. So the original bigger number was the absolute value of 10, right? So we need to make sure that it takes in that negative sign. So the absolute value of 5 is smaller than the absolute value of 10, which means that we need to take 10 minus 5, once we have 10 minus 5, we can say, okay, that gives me 5, and I'll just keep the sign of my original number. Okay. Now there's another way we can start conceptualizing that if that doesn't make very much sense. Okay, so let's take this 5, and we know this 5 is positive. Okay, so let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positive numbers. And then we have our 10, and our 10 is negative. So we're going to say negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8, negative 9, negative 10. Okay, so now what we can figure out is that a positive cancels out a negative. So that means this group is canceled out and becomes 0. This group cancels out and becomes 0. This group cancels out and becomes 0. This group cancels out and becomes 0. And this group cancels out and becomes 0. So all I'm left with is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. So my answer in this case is going to be negative 5. So maybe that will help you visualize a little bit more about what's going on. So in this next example here, we're going to say find the sum of negative 3 and 7. So we're going to say, okay, which absolute value is bigger? Well, the absolute value of 7 is bigger than the absolute value of 3. So we'll take 7 minus 3, and we'll find out that that is 4. Now again, we need to figure out what sign it needs to be, and we do that by finding the sign of the original bigger number. So the sign right there is positive, so we know this is going to be a positive 4. So negative 3 plus 7 is going to be positive 4. And again, the way that we can look at this using our kind of counters is to say, okay, well, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positive numbers, and we had 1, 2, 3 negative numbers. So as we start canceling these groups out, that becomes 0, that becomes 0, that becomes 0. What I'm left with is 1, 2, 3, 4 negative numbers. Not negative, sorry, positive numbers, which means that my answer is going to be that positive 4. Now this takes us into an interesting case, okay, when we are adding opposites together. Now we need to know that this happens only when we're adding integers with different signs, because that's what opposites are. So two numbers that are same distance from 0 on a number line, but on opposite sides of 0 are called opposites. For example, negative 3 and 3 are opposites because they're both 3 away from 0, but they're in the opposite direction from 0. So we can use the additive inverse property. And the additive inverse property says that the sum of an integer and its additive inverse, or opposite, is 0. So we can see 6 plus negative 6 is going to become 0, because that becomes just a 6 minus a 6. We can say, okay, negative 25 plus 25 is also going to be 0, because that's just going to be 25 minus 25. And in algebra, just using our letters instead of our numbers, we can also say that a minus a is going to be 0, because no matter what that a becomes, it's always going to be the same value, which is going to be canceled out by its negative or opposite. So they also become 0. So as we're looking at adding those opposites together, okay, we can practice this out a little bit. So let's say we want to find negative 12 plus 12. So as we do this, we can say, okay, well, which one of these two is bigger? Well, they're kind of the same size. So we can say, well, then let's just go 12 minus 12 is going to be 0. And let's give it the sign of the bigger one. Well, can we have a positive 0? Yeah. Can we have a negative 0? Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter because 0 doesn't take on any signs. So it just stays at 0. The other way that we could visualize this is we could say, okay, well, that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 positives, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 negatives. And as we start going through this, we can say, okay, that canceled out, and this cancels, and that cancels, and this cancels, and that cancels, and this is 0, and this is 0, and that is 0, and this is 0, and this is 0, and this is 0, and this is 0, and all those zeros together canceled everything out, so there's nothing left. So all we have is a big fat 0. So when we're adding those opposite signs together, what we're always going to end up with is 0. Okay, so let's get some more practice with adding integers of different signs. So as we look at this, again, we can say, okay, we have a negative 11 plus a 6. So as we get negative 11 plus 6, we can say, okay, which one has the bigger absolute value? Well, that 11. So we're going to go 11 minus 6 is equal to 5. And then we need to keep the sign of the bigger number, so that means this is going to become a negative 5. Okay. Now I'm not saying that 11 minus 6 is negative 5. What I'm saying is negative 11 plus 6 is going to become negative 5. Okay. Now again, as we look at this, we can say 12 plus negative 5. So as we look at 12 plus negative 5, we're going to find the absolute values of both of those. We're going to find out which one is bigger. Well, that's 12. So we can look at this as 12 minus 5, and that's going to become 7. And again, as we look at this third example here, we can see 4 plus negative 4, and we can think, oh wait, those two are the exact same number. So we can use our additive inverse property and know that those are going to cancel each other out and become 0. So for answer number 1, we got negative 5. Answer number 2, we got 7. And answer number 3, we got 0. Okay, so we're going to be working with adding more than two integers together. So in the case that we have more complex math than just two numbers, which happens quite a bit in real life, okay, we're going to be adding more than one together. So over here we have a list of bank account transactions that happened in July, okay, and we want to find the change C in the account balance, okay. So we need to find the sum of the 4 different transactions. So the first thing that we can do is we can actually write down an equation. And that equation is going to be, okay, the change of the account is going to be equal to negative 40 because we took $40 out of the account. We're then going to add 50 in because of a deposit. We're going to add another 75 in because of another deposit. And we're going to take away another 50 because of a withdrawal. So we can write that equation down so that we can have it to work with. Then our next step is going to use the cumulative property of addition. And we use this cumulative property of addition because we actually can see that we have a positive 50 up here and we have a negative 50 up here, which means it'll be really easy to cancel those two numbers out. So by using the associative property, we can say, oh, it doesn't matter what order that we add these in, but we can now use our additive inverse property to get that canceled out to 0. Okay, once that 0 is there, we can basically just ignore it and cross it out, and we can say, hey, all I have is a negative 40 plus a 75, and it's back down to two numbers that I can easily add together. Now, they're two numbers with different signs, which means we're going to be working with subtraction. So you have a 75 minus a 40, and that's going to end up becoming 35. So once we hit 35 plus 0, again, that's just 35. And so we can say, hey, I just added all those numbers together without any problem at all. So because C is equal to 35, the account balance increased by $35 in July. Now, if C had ended up being negative, just through some sheer chance, that actually means that the account would have decreased rather than increased. Okay, so we're going to work with another example, just adding a bunch of numbers together. We're going to be looking at those different integers to see how this would work out. So if we're going to find the change in the account balance for August, so we can say, okay, the change is going to be equal to the original deposit of $35 plus another deposit of $40 plus a negative $25 because that negative 25 is going to be that withdrawal. They're taking it away. Now, as we look at this, we can say, okay, well, I know that 35 plus 40 is going to be equal to 75. So 75 plus that negative $25 from that withdrawal. And then we can say, oh yeah, so we're adding numbers of different signs. So I'm just going to be using subtraction. So I know I have 75 minus 25, and I know that C is going to be equal to 50. So the change in the account balance was $50. So we can say that in August, we increased the amount in our account by $50. Okay, so I'd like you to try this on your own. Go ahead and pause the video so you can try and do this. And then once you're done, go ahead and push play so you can see if your answers match with mine. So with problem number 1, we have negative 2 plus 11. Since those are different signs, what we're going to be working with is subtraction. So we'll take that 11 and minus 2, and that's going to be equal to 9. And the 9 takes on the sign of the bigger number here, so that would be the 11, which means it would be positive. Okay. Now again, with number 2, we're adding numbers of different signs, so we're going to be working with subtraction. But in this case, we're going to start with that negative 10 on top because it has the bigger absolute value. And then we are going to go ahead and subtract that 9, which gives us 1. And then this 1 has the same sign as the original bigger number. Okay, so we're going to say that this 10 was bigger, and so it had the negative up here, which means that we're going to say that this is going to be a negative 1. Okay, now as we look at this, we can say, okay, we now have negative 31 plus 31, which means that they are opposites of each other, and they're going to cancel each other out and become 0 through the additive inverse property. And finally, we want to find the change in the account balance if someone first withdraws $40, then deposits $30, then deposits another $40, and finally withdraws $50. So we want to find the change in the account. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write down that it is an equation of change equaling first a withdrawal, and that withdrawal is going to be negative, so that's negative 40. And then we're going to add that $30. And then we're going to add another deposit of $40. And then we're going to finally withdraw $50, which means we're adding a negative 50. Okay, so I wrote in all these extra zeros so you can see kind of where they came from. But I see this is 0.00, 0.00, 0.00, 0.00. So I'm just going to get rid of those. So I'm going to say C is equal to negative 40 plus 30 plus 40 plus negative 50. Okay, that makes it just a little bit easier to see what's going on. Well, now I can say, hey, wait a second. That's got a 40 right there, and that's a negative 40 right there. Those two are opposite, so I can just cancel those out because negative 40 plus 40 is going to be 0. So then I can say, okay, through my additive inverse property, that disappears. And I can say, okay, my change is going to be equal to that 30 plus that negative 50 now. So as we look at this, we can say, okay, that negative 50, that absolute value is bigger than that 30, so they're different signs, so now we need to subtract. So we'll take that 50 minus that 30, and we'll see that's going to end up being 20. Now that 50 was originally negative, so this ends up being a negative 20 here. So what we can say is then that C is going to be equal to negative 20. Okay. Now, when we say that C is equal to negative 20, that means we had a negative change in the account. So there's $20 less in that account at the end of the month than there was at the beginning. Okay, so we've reached the mini assessment for the lesson at the end of the notes today. Go ahead and put these in your notes so that I can check for them on Friday. Make sure to remind me that you have done these in case you weren't here this week, and I will see you all soon.